My son is about 9.5 years old now, and I have no doubt that he is the joy of my life. My wife died a few years back, so it's just been me and him. I've worked hard to make up for the fact that he doesn't have a mother anymore, and I feel glad to see that he's just like any other boy his age. Happy, gleeful, innocent. But the story I'm about to write has nothing to do with him. He did, however, help me remember it. For some context, I've always been uneasy during Christmas time, and I only really started to celebrate it when my wife, on her deathbed, told me to make sure our son would always have a grand Christmas. She died on Christmas Eve, and every year since then, I've always made sure to go all out on Christmas. It's the only way I know I can make this time of year easier for my son and for myself. I could never remember why the holiday joy of Old Saint Nick was something I never liked or looked forward to, but a few days ago my son announced that he would be writing his own letter to Santa Claus, and as he scampered up the stairs and into his room to do just that, I felt myself freeze mid-sip of my drink. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor below my stiff hand. That's when it all came back to me. Something I myself had forgotten, but my bones and subconscious certainly had not. Something which had terrified me so badly that upon remembering it, I became as still as a marble statue. The following is a recounting of what my son made me remember. The event in question took place when I was 11 and was finishing the 5th grade. A blessed time, I should say. Puberty had yet to hit, and I was without a care in the world. Well, almost. You see, there was this boy in my school. His name is still engraved in my mind. Timothy Herzmauser, but everyone called him Tim. Tim was nearly a foot taller than me, as he had been held back twice. And he was, as you've probably guessed by now, the stereotypical bully, always looking to cause trouble at every corner. Sound innocent? Well, by adult standards, it really was. A push here, a shove there, an insult sprinkled on top. Just little things that can be brushed over. For 11-year-old me though, he was evil incarnate, worse than serial killers or terrorists. I think that's the part that insults me the most about this memory. He was just a bad kid, not a bad person. And what happened makes me feel just so much more guilty. It all came to a breaking point when one day, the day before Christmas break started, I was writing my letter to Santa Claus. I was a bit embarrassed because I was at the age where writing letters to Santa Claus wasn't really seen as something that was acceptable anymore. I thought of myself as being a year too old to still write him, but I did so nonetheless. I was sitting on a bench near the school playground during recess, as oblivious to my surroundings as can be, writing my letter with a smile on my face, when all of a sudden it was snatched away from my mittened hands. I looked up and saw Tim waving the letter up and over his head, shouting at everyone about what I was doing. The embarrassment I felt at that moment has yet to be matched, even now, nearly 30 years later. I got angry and charged at him, but that pubescent boy had no trouble shoving me to the ground like a rag doll. I laid on the tarmac, crying both out of pain and out of embarrassment, but mostly the letter. I don't remember much about what happened afterwards. All I remember is that when I came home, I rushed up the stairs to my room, just like my son did, and slammed the door shut. Night had fallen when I opened my eyes, and I was sitting on my desk, a pen in my right hand and an unfinished letter before me. The only word on it was "Dear." Around me on the floor were countless crumpled up balls of paper, and I remembered that I had been writing the most hateful letters to Santa about Tim, asking old Saint Nick to give him a fat truckload of coal for Christmas, but I would end up crumpling each on up and starting anew. As I stared at the blank piece of paper, only one thing came to mind. I wrote after "Dear" the only word that wouldn't make me crumple this letter up. Krampus. The letter went as so. "Dear Krampus, this Christmas I want a present only you can give. I know you punish bad kids, and I know one kid who is the baddest of them all. His name is Timothy Herzmauser, and he is a bully in my school who bullies me every day. Santa giving him coal isn't enough for me. I want him gone and punished. That is all I want for Christmas this year. From Sam." I put it in an envelope and marked it with my address and a dozen post stamps. When it came to the delivery address, I wrote South Pole because, with my little kid logic, I surmised that since Krampus is the polar opposite of Santa, that must mean that he lives in the other pole. I ran out, nearly trampling my little sister, who was 2 years younger than me, and rushed outside where I dropped my letter in the outgoing mailbox. Life went on after that, and I forgot about that letter. I admit that this post has been sparse on details thus far, but you have to understand that 30 years erodes one's memory quite a bit. But even so, I will never forget the day I got that letter in my mailbox. On that day, I vaguely remember my mother telling me to go pick up the mail outside, or was it my father? And the closer I get to my mailbox in my head, the stronger the memory becomes. I opened the mailbox, and among our usual mail, I found the oddest of letters. My memory of this is the strongest and most vivid. I still remember how the rough parchment caressed the skin of my small hands, and how the beautiful wax seal of an onyx black candle greeted me. I stopped paying attention to the world around me, wholly hypnotized by the letter. I opened it where I stood, and the memory of me writing my letter to him came back in an instant as I read what this letter contained. Words with beautiful but hard to decipher handwriting streaked across a vellum surface. I read each and every one, and in doing so, I burned those wretched things in my mind like a true Christmas curse. Dear Samuel, my frozen heart within my furry chest was thawed by your letter. I hardly ever receive any correspondence here in the South Pole, and it really does get quite lonely where I reside. I leapt up with joy and clacked my hooves when one of my helping elves brought me your letter. Of course, Samuel, of course I shall get rid of that nasty Timothy Herzmauser for you. I shall ensure that a good little lad like you will never have to be bothered by the likes of a boy like him ever again. Dearly yours, Krampus. The signature was horrendous, but also beautiful. If I had to compare it to something, it would be as if Mozart or Beethoven were stricken by a seizure mid-performance, but they still continued to play, producing a beautifully vile sound as their genius would not allow for anything less. The date was December the 16th, 1992. I am ashamed to say that I hadn't understood the gravity of my actions. But then again, what the hell was I expecting? I was high on bravado, too old to be frightened by my terrible actions and too old to have thought twice before doing it. The days flew by, one by one like the ticks of a grandfather clock. Christmas Eve finally came. December 24th, 1992. I could have stayed in bed and slept through everything, but I just had to see him. I would do what no one had ever dared to do. I would catch a glimpse of Krampus. My plan was perfect. Well, the living room arrangement was perfect, so to speak. You see, my living room was a tad small, which is why it was arranged the way it was. It was located on the second floor of my house, connected with the kitchen and with windows that faced the front yard. If you climbed down from the third floor to the second floor, you'd find yourself in the living room, with an open doorway that led to the kitchen on your left. Between the stairs and the wall on your right was a large television which sat on a large TV bench. Opposite the television was a fireplace where we'd hung our stockings, and right next to it was a grand Christmas tree that we had all carefully decorated as a family on the first day of December. My plan was to hide behind the TV and wait for Krampus to come. I don't remember if I actually planned to confront him or not. The next strong memory I have is sitting on the floor behind the TV. The gentle fire gave me light so I wouldn't be frightened by the dark. I sat for who knows how long, dozing in and out. My memory gets hazy here, but then, like the flashing click of a camera, a memory as clear as pure spring water comes to mind. Something which made me sober out of my sleep at the drop of a hat and pay close attention as if I was hearing the final words of a dying man. "What on earth are you doing here?" a whispered shout echoed. I jerked awake and felt a jolt of adrenaline course through my body. The voice that answered the question is one that made my skin crawl as if my muscles had excreted maggots. Imagine if the deepest voice you can think of spoke while sharpening a knife against jagged rock so that each stroke matched with every syllable spoken by them. That's the best way I can describe the voice that I heard. "I was invited here," Brother Krampus spoke, and to this day I wonder how I was able to keep my bladder and bowls full. Just remembering it as an adult sends shivers down my spine, let alone being 11 years old. "Bullshit," the other voice shouted in a whisper. I heard the sound of paper rustling, and a deafening silence ensued. "Why you," the kind voice said. "He has no idea what he has done, and you know damn well of as much." "Maybe so," the gravelly voice of iron groaned, "but still, it would, in fact, be quite rude if I let it go unanswered. Do you not agree?" "Leave," the kind voice demanded. Now, dear brother, there is no such need for you to become impatient." The voice was shaking my insides as though I'd swallowed a speaker playing heavy metal. I will leave in due time. I just will not with this present. The hell you are. And who are you to say that? Sleep was tightening its grip on me, which is why I missed the next part. Out of the both of us, Santa said, only my hands hold a present. Your claws grip something that is only punishment and nothing else. I can tell as much, and I refuse to let you leave whatever vile atrocity you've wrapped under this fine fir tree, lest I be struck dead by the screams and fright you shamelessly wish to incite. This is your last chance to leave, brother, or I promise to use force if you still insist on being a stubborn mule. A soft chuckle from Krampus pierced the air, and I felt as though I'd been dropped in the middle of the Arctic Ocean while my feet were stuck in a block of concrete. Now, brother, Krampus said as gently as his voice would allow. Let things not get as ugly as they did back in March 1888 or in November 1940. Especially now during the month of joy. You wouldn't want to ruin your very own holiday, would you? The hushed arguing continued, and I gradually found myself falling deeper and deeper into sleep, no longer able to fight it. I collapsed on the floor and blacked out. I awoke to shrill shrieks stabbing my eardrums. My mother was standing in front of the tree, dropped presents she most likely wanted to put under it now, scattered all throughout the floor like neglected toys. When the police came and I told them my story and showed them the letter, they believed me, just not in the way I hoped. They surmised that my letter had been intercepted by some sick bastard, and he'd taken it upon himself to take on the role of Krampus. I had heard him have a mental breakdown in my living room, his mind completely disconnected from reality. They never did find him as they promised, or the rest of Tin, but I do remember one thing, which although it is the haziest, it also the one that scarred me the most. As I collapsed on the floor from exhaustion on that night, in the brief period before my eyes collapsed shut, I saw through the gap between the TV bench and the floor a pair of thick snow boots facing a pair of blackened and rough hooves. A drop of blood falling down on the floor in front of the fire, and in front of me before my eyes slammed shut.
I love visiting my grandma. She always makes the food that I like, and in large quantities, and spoils me. With the hustle and bustle of college life, it's nice to go back to my childhood and allow myself to be spoiled for a few hours every few weeks. Even though she has 6 grandchildren, she makes it clear that I'm her absolute favorite. She'd often have the whole family around for dinner, and after they left, she'd bring out the good stuff she'd made just for me. We usually have a big Christmas dinner together with the whole family. However, as the years go by and the younger ones start growing up, fewer and fewer people show up. Last year, everyone already made plans, forgetting about poor Grandma. I don't blame them, but they often forget how these visits mean a lot to her, especially ever since Grandpa died. That's why when I talked on the phone with her and she asked if I had any plans, I lied to her and told her I didn't. She immediately jumped at the opportunity to politely invite me, going so far as to offer me to sleep over at her place. She said there's one room which hasn't been used in years, and I could stay in there. I immediately said yes and agreed to stay over, realizing how happy that would make her. I canceled the plans I made with my friends, telling them something else came up. Although they were bummed about it a little, their drinking party wouldn't stop because of me. That was the last Christmas that I would ever spend with my grandma. On Christmas Eve, I arrived at my grandma's place, and she greeted me like she always does, with a tight hug and a lot of kisses. I barely even stepped inside when she started offering me food. She had already made what can only be described as an all-you-can-eat buffet. We dug in, and once we were done, she showed me where I could sleep for the night. It was a cozy little bedroom, which apparently used to be my mom's room when she was little. Grandma told me not to leave my room during Christmas night, in order to avoid disrupting Santa in his work. She said that if I really needed to use the bathroom, I could, but to be extremely quiet and not to go downstairs. On the nightstand, she left a list of the things I should do before I go to bed to ensure I get a good present. I decided to play along and abide by the rules. I told her I'd read it before I went to bed and do everything necessary, and she seemed content with that. She wished me good night and left the room. I was pretty tired from the trip there and the enormous dinner I just ate, so I laid down on the bed and involuntarily fell asleep within minutes. I awoke a few hours later. I glanced at my watch and realized it was 3:01 a.m. I got up to grab a glass of water downstairs from the kitchen and groggily walked through the darkness, trying to avoid any loud noises or turning on the lights not to wake Grandma. I went downstairs and turned on the kitchen light, gulping down a glass of water. I glanced towards the living room at the Christmas tree, and something caught my attention under the glow of the decoration lights. There was a small plate with a tiny paper that said, "For Santa." I reckoned it was cookies and milk, but when I got closer, I realized that the plate was empty. Red liquid was in it, and right next to the plate was a small bucket. Obviously, I found this weird, but figured that Grandma may have just forgotten to put it away or something. I turned off the kitchen lights and returned to my room, just then remembering the list my grandma gave me. I grabbed it off the nightstand and started reading. "Dear James, thank you for visiting me for Christmas. You made your grandma really happy. Now Christmas is a little different in this house than what you're probably used to, so it's very important that you follow these rules on the list. Rule number 1, make sure to close your windows and ensure that they are closed properly. These old windows don't work properly sometimes, so if you feel like cold air is coming in, let me know. 2, don't put any wood in the fireplace after 9 p.m. Santa will be really angry if it's scalding in the chimney or if there's still smoke. 3, you didn't forget any milk and cookies, did you? I stopped reading and chuckled at the list. Grandma clearly wanted me to follow the basic rules for Santa, like when I was a kid. But again, I decided to oblige. I continued reading the list. In this household, we don't use milk and cookies. We use raw meat and blood. I already left a bucket by the Christmas tree, and there's a raw piece of chicken I put on the plate. Santa sure loves his diet. 4, if you are woken up by the sound of scratching or knocking on your window, ignore it. Your room is on the 2nd floor. There is no way to reach up to it. In fact, it's best not to look there. But if you see someone beckoning you, pretend they're not there. They may try to open the window from the outside. This is why it's so important to keep the windows closed. 5, you may hear growling coming from the kitchen. It's okay, because Santa never comes upstairs, and since I already left the chicken for him, that should satisfy him. By this point, I was sure Grandma was just messing with me. That was until I heard the sound of 3 gentle knocks on the window behind me. I froze in place, staring at the list, but practically staring through it. 3 more gentle knocks ensued, but I did my best not to give away that I heard them. Once again, there were 3 more knocks, and then the sound of scratching started. First gently, then louder, as if a rat was trying to bite through the wall. It lasted for about a minute until it completely stopped. Only when it did I gather enough courage to slightly shift my position. That was a mistake though, because when I looked down to the floor, at the light which was cast in from the window, I saw the unmistakable shadow in the form of a humanoid silhouette stretched across. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like whoever was there held both his hands on the window and stared directly towards me. I decided that the best thing to do is continue reading the list, to try and distract myself. 6. If someone walks into your room while you're sleeping, and you happen to wake up, pretend that you're still asleep. In the worst case scenario, the person will sit on the edge of your bed and observe you. So do your best not to let them know you're awake. If you feel their breath on your neck, and it gets progressively closer, it means they realize you're awake. 7. You may hear me call you from downstairs. Don't listen to it. I will under no circumstances go downstairs during the night. 8. The last and most important rule. If you get up to go to the bathroom, never ever, ever turn on any lights in the house. He has trouble noticing you in the dark, but if you turn on the light, he will be able to follow you wherever you go. And then, not even locking your door will help. 9. Follow these simple rules and in the morning, we can open your Christmas presents. Love, Grandma. The scratching and knocking had already stopped by the time I was done reading, and the shadow from the window was gone. I got into bed and covered myself over my head, shivering not even from the cold. Sometime during the night, I heard my door open, but did my best to ignore the footsteps and low growling noise. I either passed out or fell asleep sometime later, but all I know is I woke up to a sound coming downstairs from the kitchen. I shot up, looking around the room and at the window, rubbing my temples and thinking about the nightmare I had. I left my room and immediately heard my grandma's voice calling me from downstairs to come and open the presents. I told her I'm coming when I suddenly felt a grip on my wrist. I turned around and saw my grandma there, staring at me, wide-eyed. She leaned in and whispered in my ear with a trembling voice, "You turned on the lights, didn't you?"
Full disclosure, I'm not supposed to be telling you any of this. Not only could it wreck Santa's dazzling PR, but it could destroy the perfect, happy image of North Pole Inc. entirely. I am an elf born and raised right here in the North Pole. I was a toy maker for a long time. I am not anymore. Last year, just before Christmas, I broke my 1,000-year contract and escaped to a place so deep into the North Pole wilderness that I doubt even Santa's own team of private investigators could find me here. There are many of us living out here trying to survive our refugee life as best as we can. Most of you don't even believe in Santa Claus or the toy-making elves or the flying reindeer, any of it, so I doubt you'll take seriously anything I'm about to tell you. But I'm begging you to please listen. We elves are held to a high standard of behavior all year round, every year of our lives. After all, it wouldn't be right for us to be making toys for good children and gathering coal for bad children if we weren't pristinely behaved ourselves. Santa takes this very seriously. That's why here at the North Pole, there's a naughty list and a nice list just for the elves. Children have it pretty easy. As everyone knows, the worst thing that can happen if you're on Santa's naughty list is receiving a lump of coal or no present at all. What may come as a surprise to you is that even though Santa sees everything a child does all year, he doesn't actually put too many of them on the naughty list. Those on the naughty list usually did more than just talk back to their parents, lie about cleaning their rooms, or fight with their siblings. Children only end up on the naughty list if they're very naughty. Elves aren't so lucky. There are many strict rules for us to follow. Breaking any one of them can get you on the naughty list. Second chances are rarely, if ever, handed out for rule breakers. From the time we're little, we're drilled on the 10 Christmas commandments. Number 1. Control your temper, be jolly at all times, never sulky or argumentative. Number 2. Never use curse words. Your speech should always be wholesome. Number 3. Give your elven duties your best effort every day. If you are lazy and fail to meet expectations, Santa will know. Number 4. Join in the singing of Christmas songs at the beginning and end of each day. You must never miss a session of singing unless you have a good reason. Number 5. Show reverence for Santa and Mrs. Claus at all times. Number 6. Never appear outside your home wearing clothing that doesn't reflect the spirit of Christmas and your status as an elf. Number 7. Physical intimacy between elves is not allowed unless Santa grants them the right to procreate during the season of procreation. Number 8. Elves must be sober at all times. Public drunkenness will not be tolerated. Number 9. Always keep your workstation neat and tidy. Number 10. Never ever falter in observing and honoring the Christmas season all the way through to 12th night. Show your dedication to the holiday in everything you say and do. This is not an exhaustive list of rules. It's just a guideline. A number of specific infractions can land an elf on the naughty list. And for elves, the naughty list is not to be taken lightly. Each year on Christmas Eve, we're called to a mandatory gathering outside Santa's estate. Armed guards march us over there and surround us, rifles in hand, as we stand there listening to Santa Claus himself list the names on the nice list first, and then the naughty list. The relief I feel when my name is called is something I cannot put to words. A palpable terror always fills the air around me when Santa reaches the end of the nice list. Even in the silence, I can feel the agony of the elves around me who know full well their names were not spoken. And then, because sparing them the pain of hearing their names is just too much mercy to be shown to the transgressors, Santa goes on to read all of the names on the naughty list. Elves are usually already weeping, shaking their heads in shocked refusal, or yelling belligerent protests by the time their names are said. A close friend of mine ended up on the naughty list years ago for using a curse word. I saw the bravest, most devil-could-care elf I'd ever known crumble that day. I'll never forget his screams of terror as he was led away. As to how I managed to consistently end up on the nice list for such a long time, I can only tell you that from the time I was old enough to fully grasp the reality of the naughty list to the point where I left, I went out of my way to be the perfect elf. I bowed deeply to Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus every time I saw them. I never ever spoke negatively of anyone or anything at the workshop. I was never late for work, always sang my heart out with the other elves, and made sure I had a smile on my face every time someone was looking my way, especially during the Christmas season. I did all of this despite dying inside as I watched other elves face the consequences of even their unwitting missteps, and always wondered, as Christmas rolled around each year, if my own reckoning was coming. The final straw was losing the love of my life to the naughty list. She had been my childhood friend. I realized I was in love with her near the end of juvenile elf training. She had the warmest smile, not fake and forced like most of us at the North Pole, but warm and true. Her laugh was infectious and she laughed often. Her short, black, curly hair danced around her face with each step she took. Her dark brown eyes smoldered with courage. And above all else, she was the kindest soul I'd ever known. She reassured me no one could see us the night she leaned in and kissed me. We were standing behind an old abandoned reindeer stable about a half a mile away from the village. It was a cold, dark night in early December. Our cheeks and hands were freezing. I cupped her face with my gloved hands to warm it, and her smile spread like melting marshmallows in a cup of hot cocoa. Terrified as I was, I didn't want that moment to end. Her soft lips awakened everything in me and warmed my soul, not a warmth like what I feel when I sit in front of the tiny fireplace in my cabin, but a warmth like the sun had finally come to the North Pole and melted everything. She didn't cry or scream when they dragged her away after her name was read off the naughty list. Her face was full of terror and shame as she looked back at me one final time. I refused to watch as she stepped up to the scaffold and waited for the noose to take hold of her neck. I stared at the ground and remained numb with disbelief. It wasn't until later that night, lying in bed, that grief hit me and I openly wept. And now I'm a North Pole expat, terrified every day that I'll be found and dragged back. Some of the other elves out here talk about going back and staging a revolution, but most of us aren't ready to take our chances. I know if my love were here, she'd enthusiastically agree to join the fight. For now, all I can do is curl up in the ramshackle shelter I built here for myself and a few others and try to remember the sound of her voice as I try to forget the pain in my chest. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacy, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.